Just say,
Hi.
hey, I'm Phil.
Hey, my name's Phil. I'm a guy. So.
I'm
Yeah.
Kevin, and these are my friends Phil and Larry, and we're just here talking about life.
And I'm Larry. I'm older than these guys, and I don't have as much hair, but I do use what's inside as well as I can.
Love that.
Here, here.
Here, here.
This is way more exciting.
So this is fun, because like I can actually produce this right here
Right.
in its basic form. I'm not going to worry about adding graphics or headers or footage or anything like that. That would make me look like a nerd sitting here, and I'm not that good at it.
Yeah. If we wanted to do that, we'd want
Your
someone
words, not
off
mine.
screen anyway. We
Mhm.
want somebody on screen doing
Right.
that.
Right.
And there is the possibility if this gets big, Riley's looking for work.
Really?
He has a budget now, and he's not quite making enough for it because
That's
he has a car and he drives.
Oh, I was like, that dude moved out? Like,
He's
I-
he's 16.
He's
just
16.
got
I
his
haven't caught up with
license.
Sterling and those people in so long.
Larry and Vicky graciously gave him one of their old cars.
Wow.
And
Very nice of you, though. Should have made that kid suffer a little bit more. But I guess, is it still a car where he has to suffer to get it working?
Not too
Not
bad.
quite.
Just got a lot of miles.
280,000 miles.
On what?
Hyundai.
Hyundai Santa Fe.
Oh, look at Hyundai Santa Fe.
Actually,
Got it.
Hyundai.
Got it.
Hyundai car. Hyundai car, mini bar.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's funny.
Worst case scenario is it'll just break down, leave him somewhere. He's a kid. He can survive. Unless he's going places he's not supposed to be.
Translation? Fuck him.
Yeah.
That's funny.
No, he's
Yeah,
done pretty
yeah.
good. He's paying for his stuff. And
He's the funniest kid though. So like he's doing some of the stuff for church. So like he's controlling the cameras a little bit and stuff. And there's not a whole lot of work to do for that.
Is
It's
he
just like
just a really gadgety kid?
I wouldn't say he's Kevin status, but he's definitely above.
Well, you've had a full decade of nerding
yeah, he's
I know.
kind of,
to get
he's
ahead
kind
of
of
him.
upper middle class.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
definitely above like most kids his age, but yeah. Anyway, so he sits there, he's getting paid, and he's just so funny because his minimum wage is like $15 an hour now, which is crazy.
That is crazy,
And
huh?
I'm like, he's like, they should be paying me more. I'm like, Riley, what are you talking about? You just have to move a little finger, or your little joystick around.
Yeah.
He got a little frustrated trying to get the OBS. It's another kind of software we're going to use instead of Sling to upload. And there was a latency. The audio was getting there before the video was. And I said, well, let's look around, find out if you got any control over that. And you do. You have the ability to delay the audio because obviously audio takes less time, I guess, to process than video does. So, you know, you have to experiment a little bit. Is it 20 milliseconds? It ended up being 300 milliseconds. They got it almost perfectly synced up. And he was frustrated. I go, you know, welcome to my world. I'm 63 years old. I don't know anything about any of this stuff, and I'm trying to get it all working.
Yeah, seriously. It's just interesting how, like, this latest generation that's coming up has never not known what a smartphone is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I don't think we're gonna see the full effect of that for 40 years.
Yeah, we're not going to see it for a while, but I mean, it's already starting to rear its head. I
Yeah.
saw an article from the Gazette for Woodland Park actually, and they're going to like start this new grading system, which I just think is complete bogus. And it's basically there's not going to be letter grades anymore. It's like you're either proficient at this skill, you're adequate at it, you're not good at it, or you're terrible at it, and then they're going to base things off of that. And I'm like, does that actually make sense to do that with this upcoming generation? And I just don't know.
I would
if
have
I
to
agree with it.
I would have to learn more about the mechanics of how that gets graded.
Yeah, I just think it's ridiculous. It's like, why go away from grading just because it's hurting kids' feelings that they're not?
Because it used to get more precise. It went from letter grades, which were real basic,
Yeah.
but then it went to like a percentage grade.
What did you say the classifications were?
It's like
proficient?
proficient, adequate, below average, and like.
Do you have that?
garbage. I don't know.
Could you
exactly.
find
So here's the unintended consequence of that outcome-based thinking.
Yeah.
3/4 of the population is going to be adequate or less.
Right.
That's incredible. I mean, to sew that into somebody's psyche and it really.
And it's like to coddle them, so because it's like, oh, I got a B, I'm not good enough, and like, I don't want to do the work to be good enough though.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm really against it. But then I saw this other article of this Florida school, and so what's that new like thing that they're doing at schools. What's it called? I forgot.
STEM? What?
No.
Oh, like where it like gives them a more specific pipeline early?
No, I forgot what it's called. There's some new curriculum that pretty much all schools are following that Obama initiated.
Okay.
Common Core?
Common Core.
Common Core.
That's the one. And this Florida school, they decided, you know what, we're not going to do that because it's stupid. And all of a sudden, their school of elementary kids has the best test averages across the whole nation
Mm-hmm.
by a large percentage. And it's like, obviously, Common Core doesn't work. Like, why are we just trying to dumb everything down in our society for these people? Not, and
Man,
to
you guys
wrap,
got right into it, huh?
to wrap it all back, like, so like Riley obviously knows technology and stuff, but he still like just wants everything just so easy because you're like, he's getting frustrated because the audio is delayed, and it's like, then work through the problem, solve it.
That's it. Problem solving isn't a priority anymore.
Yeah.
I
Which is
have a
unfortunate because that should be the absolute primacy
oh
of
yeah
learning at this time.
yeah because you're constantly facing changing circumstances. So they can know where the voice is coming from. I have an old fart illustration.
Okay.
So this is not just a current issue. So I was pretty good in school. I could do nothing and get B's, or I could work hard and get A's. And I mostly did nothing and got B's because I was more interested in art and some of the other things, running the paper and stuff. And so because I was in business with my dad, I didn't have plans to go to college right away. I was working with Dad. But so 4 years later, about 4, maybe it's even almost 5, I decided to go to school up in Oregon, and I had to take my SAT test. So 5 years out of out of high school, with no really prep for it. I just went in one Saturday and took my SATs. And I never considered myself very good at math because I got caught in between one style of math teaching and another when we moved from Texas to California. So I was really good at estimating, and I did almost all of my stuff through estimating, and then I would fine-tune the answer. But so practically it works, but I don't know math. I don't even still know my multiplication tables.
Okay.
And so I took the SATs, and however long it takes to get those results back, I was floored, okay? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to use this to say I'm smart. 5 years out of school without any real continuation of, because I was working in a body shop, I scored in the top 1% in the writing, comprehension, reading, all those things, which that didn't totally surprise me because I was always pretty good at that, and I had good reading. But I scored in the top 3 percentile in the nation in math.
It's crazy.
And I go, I wasn't that good when I was in high school,
Huh.
and I scored in the top 3. So somehow in that 5 years, that decline had already manifest. And 5 years is a pretty good test sample of people because they've been all the way through high school in that amount of time. And I was shocked. So I can't even imagine.
Oh, so one, like a half-life of the test itself? Is that kind of what you're referring
Well,
to?
yeah. I mean,
Being calibrated.
my
towards
guess
something
is
else?
I would not have scored, I know I wouldn't have scored that high in math in 73 when I graduated. But when it comes up to 78, I was in the top
That's
3
crazy.
percentile. And so I can't even imagine. My guess is that, and I know this is not totally fair, but you could take a random sampling of 40, 50-year-olds, and they could outscore most high school graduates unprepared on a SAT or ACT test. And it just shows they're not teaching.
Yeah. I mean, Common Core just pulls away from problem solving altogether. At least I was reading.
I'm not well read on Common Core, though.
I don't know like the math stuff. I know it's really weird. Instead of just like straight subtracting stuff, they're like add this number so that it makes it easier to subtract later.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of just weird like loop around this problem instead of just solving the problem. And then for like the reading and writing and stuff, instead of teaching kids phonetics, they're just like learn all of these words, but don't know how to use them or anything. Just know these are the words instead of let's actually learn like a. Like it can sound like a or it can sound like ah, depending on where it's at in the word. So that you can actually learn to sound out things instead of this is what the word looks like, so that's what it is. And so you're not actually teaching them how to problem solve through that even at a very basic level.
Have I you guys read or heard what the like foundational philosophy behind Common Core is then?
I haven't read into that much. I know that in principle, it's supposed to make
I have a
the
smartphone. I
learning
can look it up.
simpler, but
Go ahead, keep talking.
yeah, it's supposed to make learning simpler. I think was their like catchphrase.
Yeah.
Intentions are always good too.
And to a point.
Yeah, that's weird.
And then
Because-
it's also to help not allow kids that are gifted to excel more. It tries to keep everyone at the same level. Because it's like, if this kid can sound out words and has learned the phonetics of problem solving, and so they can do more advanced words, then Jimmy over here, who hasn't gotten that far in his problem solving yet, is going to be left behind and feel bad. So it's
Yeah.
like, let's just teach them words because they can all know words.
Yeah, I have some opinions about learning and development in general, but I'm not knowledgeable on what the policies are historically
Right.
for education. I know some very basic broad brushstrokes, but I don't know what the minutia of the policies were. And I know it kind of started with Bush, with W. Bush, where they dumbed that down a lot, and then I think Obama did some other iteration, and I don't know the
Yeah.
policies of it. And so it's interesting to me, what went down, because I know that the U.S. scores like the STEM metrics of pre-secondary education in the U.S. is significantly lower
Yeah.
than other nations, and that's a problem.
And it's dropped
It just
significantly in
keeps
the last 10
it just keeps
years.
going.
Right.
I'm sure
And-
we've all seen that one video that circulated of a TV show, and there's this panel of people. I don't know exactly what they're debating, and college students are allowed to ask questions. And this one girl is like, "So why is America like the greatest nation still?" And the guy just flat lays into her. He's like, "First off, we're not the greatest country anymore." And he like gives out all these
that
statistics.
TV show. Yeah, that's from a TV show.
It's from a TV show, but the statistics he gives are accurate. Like, I looked them up,
Uh-huh.
and it's like, we're like 42nd in literacy and like 35th in math, and like, we're not number one in anything except for agriculture and one other thing.
Yeah,
so
I
why are
haven't
we still
studied
the
that.
greatest? We're not the greatest country
But I remember
anymore. And our education does just keep declining.
Yeah.
It's not easy to pin down.
Right. It's
Not even
there's
in here when I'm trying
and
to
for
read.
example, in more conservative circles, like there's so much stuff that's like, oh, revoke Common Core, revoke Obamacare, all these things. It's like people are trying to have broad brushstrokes opinions on extremely complicated problems.
Definitely.
And that's
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get perturbed very quickly when people have one opinion about this big thing, when it's like, actually, if you're thinking, like, for example, of Common Core reform, you have to gut and rebuild several different dimensions
Right.
of how any one community, let alone all those communities as a conglomerate of the union, like, you don't, like, I have not learned of a human being who understands how that would be done.
Yeah.
So the law of unintended consequences is something that people don't think about. You mentioned that a whole generation's grown up with smartphones. Keeping them charged is not really the big issue. That's not the biggest problem you have to solve,
Right.
but it feels like it. And if we don't think through, what does it mean that people don't read books? Now you can get almost everything you want on there, but if you don't know they exist, if there's not a physical connection to it, it may not even occur to you that they're a source for you. Like Riley doesn't like to read.
Right.
And it's not that he can't read, but how's the atmosphere of sitting with a book, or the tactile nature of that? How's that going to affect people in the long run? The same thing.
Well, people who are habitualized to reading a physical book, I can imagine, like, it's not a strong habit for me, but I imagine it's extremely cathartic,
It's fun,
which has
yeah.
long-term positive
Yeah,
benefits.
and I mean, I read most of the books I read electronically now too, but
I would be a dunce if it wasn't for audiobooks. Not kidding.
really, yeah.
Like, the only reason I'm not a college graduate and able to be lucid and functional in my world is because of that
Mm-hmm.
empowerment I've had through my smartphone.
Okay, so like here's an unintended consequence of that, and I applaud that. I think it's fantastic, and it's great to use technology. I was reading a book the other day that I ended up buying the Audible on it because it was so dense. I needed to listen to it to get through. But that also breeds the acquisition of information through books in a setting where you're not really concentrating on it.
Right.
So you're only going to pick it up at a surface level, and some of the deeper points, the ability to go back, like that's even difficult with a digital book, but it's really, really hard to find a place in an audiobook unless
Right.
you're skilled at it. So, what are the consequences of never being without information? Like, you really don't have to learn anything. You just have to know how to find it,
Right.
like directions, or like.
I think long term is that if you just think you can find everything, then learning in general is going to plateau, and our society isn't going to keep on this trajectory of we're going to continue to get smarter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, there's no point to, because I can just Google it.
Well, it's
Why
it's very
strive for
interesting.
more? Like, oh, it's on the internet.
Like, my interests point me more toward the psychological and philosophical things of learning how human beings work, and that's
Mhm.
kind of been not only where my interests tend to pull me, but the things that I'm trying to figure out point me there in the books and stuff I'm consuming more so than not. And like, it can get very dismal to me because there's a book called The Bell Curve, for example. I think the guy's name is Campbell, was one of the authors. He's the only one that's still alive. It's an extremely controversial book. Sam Harris is probably one of the most prominent intellectual minds in the what's the word? Not Christian, but the other.
Secular?
Yeah, in the secular world. And even he had one on his podcast, and he prefaced it with, and they had a 3-hour conversation about it. But before that, he's like, hey, I learned about this book, and Sam Harris confessed that he was a proponent of the people that heard it was a bad book and just wrote the guy off. But once he learned that he was just writing him off and looked into it, he's like, yeah, these are some profound things that we're looking at. And the Bell Curve expounds on what the book, and in the podcast they talked about the cognitive elite. And so SAT scores and all these metrics that we use to measure the aggregate of human beings coming through our education system is constantly corrected for the aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
But that aggregate never reflects the top 5%, and that's Pareto principle of distribution and so on in any creative world. So the top 5% of our population has the cognitive power that drives the progress of everyone.
Yeah.
So not that anyone can't contribute, but just that's how that statistic works. So
Right.
it's very dismal in that way. And the way that technology is becoming prominent in this society is congealing and insulating and elevating that cognitive elite in a way that will leave behind those who are not, or those who can't adapt to that new level of functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And so all that to say, Jonathan Haidt is another human being. I think he's a very, very educated man. He's published a lot of stuff on the psychological and neurological pathology of like how people react to threat versus disgust, and how you can map that on top of how we look at policy dialogues and political and religious dialogues within a society, and it's very like between left and right and so on. It's very, very interesting. And I'm getting to all this to say, like, even a program that me and Rachel are working through to improve our lives, John and Misty Butcher have a program called Lifebook, which is really, really cool, the way they divide life into different dimensions and how you can prioritize and think about them in a way that proactively creates the life you want. And on the side of parenting, they talked about education, and they've got 4 kids, and they've got 2 that are like teenagers now, but they already have 2 who've moved out and started families and stuff. And he's like, and he described, they've tried homeschooling and stuff. He's like, honestly, mostly we're unschooling them right now.
Yeah.
It's very, very freeform. He says, like, this is what the future is. Like, they're going to be entering a world that you don't have to have a repository of knowledge within you to solve every problem like it used to be. And societies in the past, and this is part of what the Bell Curve talks about, is have been much, much more static, just because technology hasn't been prominent enough to change society-wide dynamics within a decade. And so because of that, if you had the right knowledge, that would work for you. And that's why professions and jobs and social relationships and social status tend to stay more static. But now that that's not the case and everything's much more fluid, you don't have to have the right repository. You have to have the right approach and the ability to extract the right information from the ether. But
Yeah.
in conclusion, to me, why it's most dismal to me is the mental faculties and critical thinking skills and so on that are so foundational to knowing how to utilize a smartphone as a tool for extraction rather than for distraction, you could say. Those are fundamental mental skills that it's not apparent that people pick up naturally. And it's not apparent that they pick it up as a matter of course from having a smartphone. So if you don't know how to slow a person down and allow them to acquire those skills, then the smartphone is actually the worst tool for them. And that's reflected in a lot of Jonathan Haidt's research about mental health markers that are starting to be tracked in the generations that have been raised not having a smartphone. And it's pretty dismal. So it's very interesting.
There's 2 points too that you brought up that seem important to me. One is, how do you learn, or how are young people going to learn to ask the right questions?
Right.
Because there's another thing that's happening here is that people are able to narrow their interests so much that it becomes an emotional challenge and a psychological challenge if somebody thinks different than they do.
Yeah.
And so it only takes a little bit of uncomfortableness to cause you to shy away from that, especially when you're totally in control of your information channel.
Well, and behind that veil, the engagement algorithms will constantly insulate and narrow those interests more and more.
And then the other is more nefarious, I think, feeling. In that if all your information is coming through media, then literally the people, perhaps the ones at that top 5%, but not necessarily top 3%, the people that control what is put out will control your thinking, and you won't even know that other things exist. And that's where you get into like Orwellian kind of futures and things where people are just kind of plugging along. Or what was the movie with Christian Bale?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Batman Begins.
No. We watched it with Sterling.
Yeah, it's a good one. They have the emotional pills that they take to subdue their emotions. Inception or something? No,
that's not Inception. Sterling would know the name.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of future scenarios that are like that. You get a Mad Max future scenario. It's kind of anti-technology, because supposedly that part of the world fell apart. But I think the other one's a lot more likely, where 2 or 3% of the people decide what's good for everybody, and then you don't even know that it's happening if your portal to information is that size.
Right. Yeah, and it is interesting. Like once we're in like more cerebral conversations like this, where we're talking about abstract hypotheticals. That's what it's crazy for me when I was growing up in the 90s to see something like The Matrix of like, oh, this is like 500 years in the future, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, it's really interesting to think about those hypotheticals where the red pill, blue pill problem is like now going to be a matter of high school graduation. And that's very interesting because I also think, and this gets into the cerebral side of all the people in Silicon Valley and so on who are like, oh, AI is like already here, it's part of the future. And I forget the guy's name who attributed this phrase, but he said that humans are the sex organs of technology. And if you think about the biological proliferation of the world, everything has had to be the step for the next one. Over eons of time, the progress of biology, and eventually you had something like human cognition and consciousness. Let's just keep it basic for that. That's its own conversation. But once you have that, you now have like a new thing. That's human consciousness exists, although it's not a physiological, tangible thing, but it exists. And beyond that, now that has risen to something else that has perfect memory, light speed calculation, all these things that you could probably call technology its own species now. Like it's starting to get to that point to me where you're never going to fractionate technology away where the internet doesn't sustain an activity. Like it always will. I mean, if all the servers go down, maybe, but
yeah, like
will
a
they?
worldwide EMP pulse or something.
Which is very plausible.
Yeah, and that's another Orwellian crazy thing. But right now it's like, it's starting to seem to me, from what little I know about it, is like, oh, this is an organism now. This is now something that we catalog as part of existence.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, it's not like, oh, we have to stop this technology thing ruining our society. It's like, no, we have to learn to, as a society or a culture, have human beings that know how to think and self-critique in a way that can be harmonious with it.
Yeah, have it integrated rather than
Yeah, because
overbearing.
rolling back's not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another, like, from what little conservative circles or far, far left circles are like, oh, this is a terrible cancer to our society. We need to get kids off phones and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
So you're announcing your naivety to the situation.
Just last night, apparently on Tucker Carlson, he had a little segment that a friend sent me and said he wanted me to see it. And it was this dude that wrote a book, and I don't remember his name. I should look it up before I bring it up. But anyhow, he did an analysis, an economic analysis of Chicago, the map of Chicago, and he has two here. And one of them was something like 1970, I think it was. Up on the lakeshore communities, it was represented by blue, a little thin line of blue, and it's the upper income, wealth, independently wealthy kind of people. And then all scattered throughout the rest of Chicago, with a few pockets of one color here. Beige was for middle income and red was for lower income or poverty. And they were kind of scattered out throughout Chicago with little pockets here and there. The neighborhood dynamics were a lot smaller. A map of Chicago today has this big, huge blue section up here in the lakeshore communities, and the rest of the map is red, with just a few fringe pockets of middle income people. And so the ability, since we can't get away from where we are, the ability to think through the consequences of it. So like that kind of a consequence in a community, all of these people have good schools up there because they make them themselves with their own taxes. They've voted and isolated it down. And the rest of the city is poor, and as a result, there is a kind of tribalism and a kind of opposition class thing that's bigger in Chicago than it is in other places that doesn't have that demographic. So crime is way up, murder rates are the highest. And but the problem
Chicago's
is,
more dangerous than Iraq.
oh yeah, it is. And the problem though isn't so much that those are irresolvable social situations. The problem is people won't consider the answers that they don't already believe. And it's their beliefs that created that thing. So one of this guy's findings, and he wasn't a particularly religious guy or Christian guy that I know of, but one of his findings is that when the government pushes away social engagement with churches and synagogues and charitable functions, then the people that are the poorest don't get anything, because the people that are the richest don't give anything to that. I mean, they'll pay their taxes or whatever the case is.
Well,
and I'm not
they
saying,
won't even do that.
and generally speaking, they have the resources and the legal paths to get out of that. And I'm not for picking on the rich. Hardly anybody earns money by being an idiot and stealing from everybody else. They work and they create something. But the fabric of being able to be friends and be able to interact, to be able to even help people that are close to you but in a slightly different position. When that stuff starts getting outlawed, and nobody will consider it because they don't want it to come in the name of Christianity, or they don't want it to come in the name of other kinds of social things. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about that. I think it's true that you don't need to use long-term memory for something that you can look up. I think that's true. And that's like outsourcing. If you outsource properly, you can be a lot more efficient. But if you outsource all of your perceptions and you outsource all of your decisions about who
your cognition,
all your cognition
to people who have pre-programmed what that's going to do to your cognition.
Yeah, exactly. And then other people are in control of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they set up everyone to be criminals toward each other. So the rich are criminals because they're not giving back, and we deserve more, even though these rich people have obviously worked for it. Some of them, sure, are probably criminals, but a lot of you lower class people are also criminals. So if you take out the minority group, a lot of those people work their asses off to get that money.
Yeah.
They didn't just sit by idly and say, hey, Mr. Rich over there should just give me his money because I deserve it, even though I'm just sitting here. Instead, they're like, no, how did he do that? I'm going to go do that myself.
Right. And it's
but
a catch-22.
Yeah, you watch the news outlets and they're like, this rich person isn't paying their taxes or whatever. And they criminalize all rich people doing that. And so then these people that are already just sitting around just want to sit around more because they're like, well, those people are just criminals. So it divides. And I think that's what the media wants right now more than anything. And that's what the internet will do, because then you can just look up random statistics. Like I saw this thing, the man who invented the Weather Channel got an interview on CNN. They tried to tell everyone, the CNN reporter was like, the co-founder, and the guy's like, wait a second, no, I founded the Weather Channel. Like, I actually founded that. That's my thing. And then they were talking about climate change, and he's like, the only reason that there's statistics out there that are 97% saying that climate change is real is because all the government money goes to these people who are supposed to prove that climate change is true. So that's what they're going to do with the money. Otherwise, they lose their money. And he said there's 31,000 other scientists out there who aren't getting paid for it, who will have a petition saying, no, climate change isn't true. This is just weather. And they have just as viable statistics, or even probably better, but they don't get published because the government's not funding them.
Right.
So it's just a way to divide. That's all it is.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 massive conversations in that, but that guy being on the show and like sharing divergent information from the common narrative, I think illustrates that catch-22, because like you're saying, there's resources at play.
Yeah.
And even with the big tech companies, the cognitive elite, who are the massive streak of blue, in Chicago, is like, it's a catch-22, because you can't have the structure of a society or a nation that penalizes excellence or penalizes delivery of value. And it's I don't have an extremely articulate way to say it yet, but I think it's akin to like Milton Friedman's invisible hand of economics, of like, when you bring and contribute value into the market or into the society, if it's going to survive, must reward you proportionately. So even though, for example, Zuck of Facebook, like, I don't think he's a good person. And I think he's done a lot of lying, and he has maligned his own self or his own narrative or original goals. And it's been corrupted, I think. But consistent with the idea of the invisible hand is he has contributed value that is unprecedented to human existence, and they have rewarded him accordingly. The same as if Steve Jobs hadn't have done that, there would not have been a platform for Zuckerberg to do what he did. And that's another example of like that slow stepping up of the species of technology, or the species of the internet.
So
and like,
so then how do you? Because I agree 100%. People ought to be rewarded for what they do. It's just inevitable, and it's right. But when somebody gains, no, that's not the way to ask the question. The question is, how do you keep question-answer dialogue and debate open? Because you shouldn't have to be one of those top 3% to have an opinion.
right.
But you also shouldn't be able to have an opinion that gets mandated if you don't know what you're talking about. So somehow there has to be a forum that allows people to ask questions and allows answers to be pursued. And this is the part about the problem solving that worries me about younger people. Is it's like if the answer's not right there, then it's almost like it's not important. Like I was joking with Riley.
Yeah.
If I can't fix it with duct tape, it probably isn't broken. I mean, to reduce problem solving down to that level is stupid.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous because when people have money, they also have power.
Yeah.
And
because all money is a concentration of energy.
Yeah, and they should not be able to control thought, because that's a problem.
Yeah. And what it sounds like the Middle Ages to me, because the dynamic that we're talking about has always existed, to what little I understand about human history. And I want to highlight that because Charles Murray is the author of The Bell Curve. And in his conversation with Sam Harris, which happened in I think last October, pretty recently, about that book that came out in '95, and it just gets more and more controversial.
Oh, you're talking the bell curve from '95.
Yeah. That
Oh,
book.
okay. I didn't know it was the same book.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
So I learned about it through that podcast. I'm like, oh, holy cow! So I bought the book, and I think I have the audiobook too. I haven't moved through it yet, but that conversation was extremely useful for me between Charlesburg and St. Mary's. But as they wrapped it up, they mentioned Chicago and New York and some of those places where those things are happening, where essentially what he called out in 1995 is being spun up exponentially because of the nature of how technology can very quickly and in gargantuan proportion deliver value, deliver reward to whoever can bring value into essentially the next Wild West. And he said that back in the Depression days and when this country was younger and there was a more traditional delivery of reward for value, at that time it was more emphatic in our culture that when you were rich and prominent, it was like kind of a moral obligation to distribute that back down to people who couldn't get it for themselves. So the charity was much less, what's the word, from the government?
Welfare oriented.
Yeah, but that's what mandated by the government. Like that wasn't, what's the word? So not private. Yeah, not privatized, but now it was like managed by the government in a way where now you're plugging that stream of charity through another oligarchy who's going to eat up most of the resources before they get distributed.
Yeah.
But in the culture, the way people thought about things, the wisdom embedded in how people did their social lives was already there. So there was a better feedback loop for redistribution. And it was more privatized through churches or charities or whatever, rather than welfare systems that pull from taxes that traditionally were used for other uses than that. So like that's a really, really complex problem. And it was solved in the past it was solved by an embedded social norm that kept that in check better than what it is now.
Well, I think that speaks again to just the criminalization on both sides. Like, back then there wasn't this influx of, like, let's just slander everybody. Like, if you're poor and I have money, I'm more willing to give it to you because you're not telling me that I'm a criminal. You know, I'm not seeing that all the time. Oh, I'm a criminal because I'm rich.
Yeah.
So I have more incentive to give back. Like, I want to give back. Or if I'm that poor person, I'm not seeing on the news all the time, the rich are just criminals. And so I'm not, like, begging for money. Like, you should give me your money. You know, I'm just still going about my day, and charitable things happen because of that. But as soon as media really exploded, I think that's even before the technological boom, but is when that shift really started to occur, because I don't know what that agenda is for, but there's obviously an agenda there.
Yeah.
To me, watching media for a long number of years, it seems to me that the shift happened when the purpose of media went from telling you what happened to telling you what it meant. And so when there was an excessive amount of commentary and interpretation of that, and like today, it's almost impossible to hear a news story that's just reporting the elements of the story. They're all about, you know, or even if they do have a story that for like 2 minutes is like that, there'll be a panel of 3 people that they bring in and to tell you what it means. First of all, it's insulting because people could figure out what it means if you just gave them the facts, probably. And second, somebody controls that narrative.
Right.
And that narrative has a sociological goal behind it. And it's really a big challenge. And again, when you then reduce your information down to tablet size portal, it's very difficult. Nobody's going to put a YouTube channel together on a guy that works in a department store,
Right.
or Walgreens. But without those things, we're really in serious trouble. And so those people get isolated that have that as a career path. I mean, there are a lot of people that are very wealthy by the world standards that just own a couple of McDonald's or something like that, you know? And then the story about McDonald's is never about that. Never.
Right.
And it's never about the entry-level jobs for kids. It's all about big corporation taking advantage of people.
Yeah. And even the people whom I admire, who are like Grant Cardone, this near billionaire real estate guy, who's just a magnanimous human being, but has a lot to say and inspire toward here's how you move about your life in a way that will generate the results you want. Most of those people started in those low level, like Jordan Peterson, who I admire very greatly, has done the intellectual thing and is a tenured professor at a university and has published in the scientific world and now has published a world-selling book, and like he's a success in so many different dimensions. And he worked on the railroad when he was in high school, and he worked on houses and all these things where there's the human meat cart, the human vehicle has neural systems and nervous systems and optical systems that are made to navigate physical worlds.
Yeah.
And so people who know how to start at that ground level and know how to solve a cash register before they fix a university, say, and stuff like that, like there's a very real connection in how the human meat cart solves problems. And so, yeah, if you fractionate that down to a tablet-sized portal, there's none of any of those sensory or physiological feedback loops that help the brain to iterate and refine a model of the world that is accurate to how the world actually is, and therefore useful in more evolutionary terms, has positive adaptive valence to the world as it is. So you won't have the right answers. And I want to add to the tail end of that Jordan Peterson has been asked this before, and that's how I know about it, because I watched a video on YouTube about it. So one of the greatest minds that I know about is available to me for free on my time.
Yeah.
Wow. But he said that someone asked him, he's like, no, there's no positive correlation between knowledge and wisdom. Because knowledge has to do with accruing a repository of information, but wisdom has to do with accurately utilizing the right information in an environment. And that's a complex cognitive problem. And so it's crazy. Because now the people who have the wisdom can leverage it on an exponentially more powerful way than ever before. So although society's constantly been fractionated in like a feudal system type of way, and that always happens, like the longer society is around, the more those cycles will start to become more and more prominent. Before, there used to be more wisdom embedded in those things that would keep it more stable over time in a way that it could self-adjust on a time frame that was still useful. But the human network hasn't figured out how to harmonize that with the exponential speed of technology yet.
Do you think it's just the speed of technology, or is it a cyclical thing in human nature and / history that this happens, where the elite become too powerful, there's too much segregation, which leads to a collapse of society, and then it has to reform and start again?
Yeah, that's why myths exist. And I'm not the person who should educate you on that, but it's one of my key focuses of interest right now is learning why that is. But you just kind of said it, is my opinion, my understanding of it now is we've always had those corrective things because it's a cyclical human nature thing. And it's also like a matter of principal laws of the physical universe. And that's part of why I say the Pareto principle of distribution has been observed in forests, in galaxies, in economies, in tribes, and all these things. Everywhere. Yeah.
It's fundamental.
So society has always had those things. Like I think in the Bible it mentions like the year of Jubilee or something like that, where in those communities like, okay, there's this time, but after that everything goes back to zero because that kept things more equal. That was their cultural wisdom and social contract that was a corrective for the Pareto principle. Right. That they didn't know it was called that. They hadn't observed it, but they, over a long amount of time that could keep up with human development, they learned that was a thing that kept things healthier. But now that technology is part of that equation, it's spinning up way faster than the human myth wisdom can catch up to.
So it's more exponential than it had been in past history.
Correct.
That's one of the handy things about war,
right?
And rebellions and things, because even technology is certainly going to play a part in that, but there is still just the uprising of people against elite control. I wonder if we'll get to that place in our country right now. It's one thing when people have different ideas. It's another thing when they have ideas that are demonstrably false and they have the power to make you live under them.
Right.
And that, I think, is what causes people to finally say no more. And then you get an underground or you get get something going. And societies do change. I'm not an expert on it, but like South Africa changed with apartheid and the racial divisions that were there. Now, South Africa's not a perfect place right now. It's still a lot of stuff going on. But those kind of things do happen. And then there's ideas that sound good but that haven't worked out practically, like socialism and communism. Can't really find a good place where they've been
Yeah,
applied.
it's because they can't rectify aspects of human nature, like, for example, the Dunbar number.
The Dunbar number is.
Roughly said, the human brain can keep track of, I think the Dunbar number is roughly between 150 and 250, where your human brain can keep track of the social network of about 250 people. And that means that your navigation system can keep you, the goings on there
You
that
can
have
keep it
social
balanced,
implications for you,
You can keep it
your
balanced.
body and hormone system can regulate you to be in tune with that. That's why, like, in a tribe, like, if you don't help hunt, we're going to be pissed if you try to eat with us.
Mm-hmm.
And you're emotionally, you will feel the emotional and hormonal in tune with that because it's important for your sustenance.
But beyond that, you have to.
But
remind
beyond that, the human brain doesn't attribute that level of emotional connection that keeps you in line, or that keeps you, what's the word, connected to it.
Yeah, the only way that socialism or communism works is if everyone has the same exact mind frame all the time.
Well, I wouldn't even
Because
say
and then that means that I'm gonna work hard regardless of what I feel is due to me. And in the world that we have grown up in / history has shown, that isn't how it works. If I work my ass off, I should get rewarded for working my ass off. So in the tribal community, it'd be I go hunt, I get to eat meat. In our society, I go to college and I get a degree that's actually beneficial toward society. I should get rewarded for that
I want
in
to
equal
expand on that.
proportions. But then you'll have those people that want the socialist aspect who don't want to work for it.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the high elite or whatever, if, for instance, Bernie Sanders became president and he started under a socialistic United States for a period of time, the people that have been working their asses off, if they're not going to get compensated the same way, they're going to just stop because, well, I have worked my ass off, but if this person that's sitting on the couch who isn't doing anything gets paid the same as me, why should I continue working? And that's
Right.
Or if they don't stop, they're going to create, because they can,
right.
an egalitarian chunk of a socialist community. There's been no socialist
Yeah.
or communist
Right.
Country that
It
doesn't
gets
have an
monogamous,
elite.
it gets capitalistic.
It gets elite. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
controlling elite.
So
And they always control. The elite always control. The common people never get to control. The average
Right.
person that the theory of communism is designed to supply, they never get control.
Right.
yeah.
Well, let me expand on that and nerd out a bit, because that Dunbar number essentially is, if you do something that doesn't contribute to the whole, and you have social liability to that, so now your body will give you cortisol and other stress hormones like, hey, you're not doing the right thing, it's not good for you, because your limbic brain is tracking where you are in the
Right.
hierarchy. It keeps track of it, and you have an emotional, physiological, existential connection to that within that number. And when you do contribute, like I got this big deer, but that gets distributed to people, so I don't get all of it. But I still feel a reward because there's a social reward of dopamine and serotonin. So
Right.
your body's like, yes, that was good. It can keep track of that number. So that's why, and archaeological and anthropological study has shown that within that number, clans that number and smaller work very socialistically,
Right.
where everyone has to contribute and there's a redistributive system within there. But outside of that number, it tends to break down because the human physiology and neurology can't keep track of that emotionally.
But now, if you bring in pharmacy, all of a sudden it doesn't matter if I don't contribute. I can just go down to the pharmacy, get the dopamine and
Right.
serotonin to combat the cortisol that's building up in me,
Maybe.
and so I can still choose to have that response if I don't want to do anything, and not.
Or
have
you
it
just
affect
split
me.
off with a double life,
Yeah.
and you become psychologically disconnected, disunified, and you're a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And you
Well,
contribute. You have one persona here.
Yeah.
I like that. That's what bugs me about a lot of our national politicians. An argument, for instance, just not to bring this up as a long-term topic, but walls don't work. Yet I have one around my house in San Francisco. Well, let's take it down.
And let's take the locks off your doors.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they're serving no purpose.
Right, and so let's use that illustration. It's beyond the Dunbar number, things break down socialistically. Because now that, like, I don't have an emotional connection to dude in New Mexico who doesn't have a job. Like, my brain doesn't track that.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. That doesn't ethically liberate me of any liability to be part of a nation and to do my part.
Mm-hmm.
That's why myth and culture became a thing. But when it's of direct impact to my environment and my tracker and my emotions and my regulation and everything, like, oh, let's just live in your house then. Like, no. My whole physiology has pointed me toward a goal in a society and a hierarchy that I'm in to get me that house and to get me in the position I'm in. So it is an existential threat to my nervous system to have any of that threatened. Yeah, so we haven't rectified that within our culture or our politics to manage a state this large. It really should be 5 or 6 different countries, demographically and economically and geologically.
The United States?
Yeah. But we're trying to do it all with one, which I think it can do. When I've started to think about this at other times, I'm like, wow, that we still must be one of the greatest experiments of humankind still. That we still are a union. And we still are, like, actually pretty wealthy and pretty healthy, and like obesity is a thing, but when you go past the survival meter where obesity is the problem, not starvation, like, historically you've done extremely well. You've done better than anyone ever thought we could ever do.
Yeah.
So stuff like that is, like, it's a big problem, but now you get to say, hey, stop eating so much, because we learned how to make more food than we could possibly eat.
Yeah.
Like, those are amazing problems to have. So we're succeeding on one level of analysis at the best experiment ever, but it's just, I think, waking us up to how much better things could get.
Yeah. And with that, like, since the United States is so large, that was the original reason that there was 13 colonies. And then they decided to be under one banner to stop the British from taking over. That was the whole purpose of the United States. Let's stay under one banner so that if colony B gets attacked, we'll all go support colony B, but otherwise we're going to be separate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was the only purpose.
Yeah, and states' rights has been an incredible check and balance to the oligarchy of the federal government.
But now everyone's just like, well, we need the feds to come in and, like, fix problems. It's like, that's not the purpose of the states.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The state is supposed to regulate itself. The federal government's supposed to come in if there's a national emergency. That's it.
Yeah, and
But it's just flipped on its head 100% because these elite politicians, at least, decide they want more power.
right.
Okay, so we started talking about younger kids.
Yeah, the Common Core. Yeah, I was
Common
about
Core.
to turn it back to that.
I couldn't find anything. All I could find on a quick search was just the virtue of it. The actual breakdown in Common Core usually happens when teachers are evaluated against their success against those tests, so then they quit teaching and they just start preparing their kids to take the test.
Right.
And that functionally has proven not to prepare the kids to actually know the material.
That's a demonstrably false model for solving problems,
It is.
accurate to
It
their
is.
environment.
All right, so what I wanted to do, because we probably got, what time is it?
I don't know. I don't have my watch to.
It's 5 after 10.
Okay, we probably got another 25 minutes, let's say.
Okay.
Everybody, in spite of all of the demographics that we talked about in Chicago and all the problems, and in spite of the fact of the very real thing about those top 3% in a technological society having a tremendous amount of power, we still have a tremendous amount of social power.
Right.
We can get with people in groups smaller than 250. We can get with micro-sized groups of 2 or 3. I have a grandson, and you're his friend.
Right.
So what are some practical steps we can do to change this? And so just as a lead-in example, all the changes that have gone on in Joyland, in our church, the prime thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reach a community of people and empower them to know it's okay to be honest and to ask questions and to even not believe while they're in pursuit of belief. Because this same sort of thing has happened in the church where a few people, and at one point it was a priesthood, and the regular people didn't even know the language that they were ministering worship in. And then it became that the theologians, and particularly the seminarians, the educational system were the ones that summed the Bible up. For instance, the revelation that is in Scripture, summed it up in doctrinal form and said, this is what you have to do, and then we'll create a creed and you have to sign it. Now, there's good things about all those things too, because shorthand is a good thing if you have a lot of information to catch, you know.
Yeah.
But when it replaces the initiative and freedom to have your own voice and to think your own thoughts, it actually eliminates you from genuine agreement with things. Because if you're not given the space to ask questions and arrive at conclusions, and if those things are constantly called rebellion, or there's just such a cultural pressure that you need to fit in, so you can't voice an opposite opinion, it creates, I don't even know how to talk about it. It creates way less than the kind of freedom and joy and fellowship and diversity that is a part of
Is reflective of a healthy
social organism, you know. And so whether that's a church or a college or a country. So what can we do on a small level? I'm finding that I have to refrain myself as a leader from sharing my ideas in the same way I used to, because the culture made it so my ideas were basically presented you with a challenge of either agreeing with them or not agreeing with them. And if you agreed with them, you had a choice to stay or go. And if you didn't agree with them, you had to go. And so that's not an inclusive relationship building culture. So I've been saying lately, I would rather leave people with good questions than good answers. And I really get a chance to do that this weekend, because I'm going to talk about how we read the Bible. But what can we do like that? Like, how can we, you and I, let's say, team up with Riley and get him to take more interest in the questions that actually have an extraordinary impact on his life, but he doesn't recognize it?
I mean, I think fundamentally, with my own miniature soul experiments that I've been doing, it's just asking questions rather than presenting material in all circumstances. So instead of coming up to you and saying, oh, hi Larry, this is how my day's going, instead I genuinely ask you, hey, how's your day going? Let me foster your conversation. Let my speech bring forth answers from you instead of me giving you answers to begin with. So a better example, I suppose, would be at work this week, there was a video on YouTube, and it was of praise and worship, and it was like a concert. And so I just asked my office mates, do you think it's appropriate to worship in this way, where everyone's directed and it's more like toward the concert? And so it just allowed them to actually open up and think about what their actual response was. And one of my friends just kept talking around in circles for like 25 minutes. And he couldn't give me an actual answer, but it allowed him to actually process his own thoughts, to come to a conclusion for himself. And then my other friend,
there's a physiological reason for that,
was already like very biased on what he thought, but it just allowed open dialogue to happen. And so with Riley, I do the same thing. Like, Riley, why don't you do why are you doing it this way? Not why don't you do it this other way? Just why are you doing it this way? And then he can answer me, and then I can give input on based off of that. Like, have you ever thought about this instead, type of thing. I think as a society in general, we don't do that ever. We always just force our opinions on people. You watch the news, that's all they're doing. They're just forcing their opinions on people rather than, what do you actually think about this? The person tells you, and then you can respond.
Yeah, is it possible that behind that urgency to force our opinions on people is we are looking for our thoughts to have meaning?
We want to be affirmed in our own belief. Yeah,
and there's a healthy part of that. There's a necessary part of that, but there's also a part that turns really uglier.
But if you start with a question and then you can still give your answer, you can still be affirmed in your thought process.
I agree.
It's you being afraid of the answer changing your thought. That's the problem. So I think that would be a simple, practical approach in our day-to-day. It would just ask questions rather than always seek or to tell.
Decades ago, we studied a book on, I don't know what it was psychology or something, but the team of authors pointed out that it is psychologically, almost physiologically impossible not to answer a question if you're asked.
Mm-hmm.
You might not voice the answer, but if somebody tells you something, it puts you in an entirely different frame of mind than if somebody asks you a question. And if you can ask the right questions, you can actually shape the direction people are thinking without shaping what they're thinking. And that's pretty healthy. Because we do need to learn from one
Well,
another.
it's powerful. It's not automatic that that's healthy.
Right.
That's an extremely powerful
Yeah.
pathway.
Yeah.
And that, I think, touches on what we talked about Common Core. We got on the idea of the power of being the 3% running the code behind your tablet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the more and more I learn about it, the more nefarious it gets. That they are psychometrically informed on how to utilize those pathways,
Mm-hmm.
which is amazing because I think we described that they're fractionating people and tearing them apart and all this. Yes, but there's also the side that doesn't have as much engagement, but there's this whole world where we can put this on there and if people like it, they can get it.
Yeah.
They just have to know how to find it.
So what if we choose not to be afraid? What if we choose not to be afraid of having power?
Right.
Because we have power. If you think and talk,
Yeah.
if you do anything, you have a certain amount of influence.
Well, let me ask this question: Is there a good reason to not be mortally intimidated by the amount of power that you have as an individual?
I think there's
Not intimidated in a way of like this is innately bad, but this is so powerful that I should be
Careful and
serious about it.
Serious about it.
There was someone quoted that similar thing. I don't know who it was, what it was from, but it was something along the lines of, man's not afraid of the opportunity. He's afraid that he has so much power in the opportunity.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. I don't know.
That's
what you're
similar to
talking
what Nelson Mandela said about we're not afraid of what's wrong with us. We're afraid of our glory or something like that.
Yeah.
Our limitations are
I'll have
finished.
to-
I'm not afraid that I'm powerless, but that I'm powerful beyond measure.
That's the
Yeah.
one. That's the quote I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
So let's just say that we bow to reality, and we realize we all have power and influence with our words, with our thoughts, and so on. Then, what constitutes the act of choosing to use that power for good with other people?
Can you elaborate on what you mean by constitute?
What are steps we could take? If we're going to be intentional about it, what should those intentions be? Like I know for a fact that I have a certain amount of influence capability because of the way I think, the way I speak, the way I can write, and stuff like that. So, what moral obligation do I have to use that influence at all? First of all, and second, what moral obligation do I have to use it for someone's benefit other than my own?
I would say that from a social side of things. Yeah, we'll
Try
go
it again,
that
try
way.
it again.
Everyone will know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's good. 3 guys with influence here.
Yeah, yeah. So how should
Sociological side of things. Yes, you have a moral obligation to allow people to think. You have a moral obligation to ask questions so they can think. Otherwise, it's all about you. And to me, morals is never about me. It's about how am I affecting everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it was all about me, then I can take everyone else out of the equation, and then there is no morality.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just me, there is no such thing as morality. It's like the same thing with laws. If there's nobody around, how can I break a law? Because it's just me. There are no laws
Mm-hmm.
then.
So the laws speak to the relationships between us
Right.
and other people, and morality speaks to the relationship between us and other
Mhm.
people. Really, I suppose you could create a category where there was a supernatural, heavenly, from God list of things you had to do, and you could do those things in a social vacuum. But that's not really reality, and unfortunately, that's why a lot of people look at
Right.
holiness and moral law. You're right. I think moral laws is how people treat one another. I think holiness is how people treat one another, as opposed to an abstract list. That's a topic for another time. But since
Yeah, because that gets into the difference between a moral law, which is a list,
Mhm.
and moral virtues, which is
A relational thing.
a internal.
All right, so let's go ahead and add to the suppositions for the last 15 minutes. Supposing that we do have positive moral obligation through relationship with the people around us to use our influence in a way that benefits someone other than us, but doesn't exclude the benefit to us.
Right.
What can be those components? And I think we've isolated at least one, which is to ask questions. And I think to ask questions in a way that's not condescending, that means we have to listen. And the only way you can sustain listening for a long time is you actually have to care what the other person says. So to recognize that there's value. And this goes a long way to solving the problem in Chicago, for instance, demographically. Because if you really care what people think, because the truth of the matter is, some of those people are in those poor neighborhoods have astounding wisdom for certain areas that some of the people in the wealthy area have quit thinking about or never even thought about for generations.
Because they're insulated from it.
That's right. And so the dialogue between people, that's what's so hard, scary to me about the way the country's going right now. The thing that's being attacked is dialogue.
Right.
That is super scary.
That might be the most pathological system imaginable in a society that's pointed in the direction we're pointing.
It's to shut down the one system that can bring the solutions.
Right.
And to call it, evil. Anyway, so yeah, like what you're doing with Riley or what I try to do, it's the way I try to talk with other church leaders that I spend time with. I spend a lot more time asking questions because I find that, when I inherited a particular belief back in '06 or something, and I haven't thought about it, I've just applied it all the time, or thought I've been applying it. It's been very useful over the last few years to ask questions about this. Is this really something real? Did I actually think this, or did somebody just tell me what to think and I was lazy?
Right. Ideological possession.
Mm-hmm. And so, can we take time like this, and maybe a format for us would be to ask a couple of questions per session.
I mean, it kind of started that way when I asked
about
the technology right at the very beginning. What do you think the world's going to look like? Because these children literally haven't been in a world without it.
Yeah. So it's an unrealistic expectation to expect them to solve problems without that.
Yeah. So that's the conclusion that we drew from it.
Yeah.
So it did start as a question.
It did. And then, what's it called about talking in a bell or something like that? A bubble?
Echo chamber?
Echo chamber, there we go. We don't want to be an echo chamber.
We really don't want to talk inside a bell. Wait a minute.
I mean, I think it'll be interesting as we start posting this too. People might have questions they could ask, and then we could bring up those questions and ask those as well in this dialogue type of setting.
So we should probably state officially that if anybody ever sees this, you have a right.
You have an obligation to ask the best question you want answered.
I have a friend that I admire as a teacher, and he says, "Now I'm going to tell you what I believe, but you are powerful to think. You are powerful to disagree with me.
Right.
And I want you to exercise that power. I'm trying to put a situation together where people, I described it as not having to put on a mask regarding a belief that they don't personally hold.
Right.
And that means that we can't do the social thing that inhibits their honesty by clamming up or rejecting or doing all the millions of body language things or whatever that you can do. If four of us in this room agree on this topic and you don't agree, we have to be intentional about making room for your disagreement.
Yeah. And
we have to disassociate that from your worth as a person belonging to us. So you have to be able to belong before you believe. And so somehow we've got to, this could be a huge success if we could make it so that people could ask dissenting questions.
With that, I also think, you're hitting on it for sure, but a lot of times it's easy to ask someone a question, hear their response, and just immediately not even take the second to why do they think that way. And I think that is also something that we should strive toward is, well, why did they ask that question, or why is their response the way it is, rather than, well, that's just stupid. I just disagree with you.
I definitely have room to grow there in that little second space.
Yeah. So
it's true, because everybody has an opinion, and that opinion on a given thing, and that opinion is based upon some sort of reasoning.
Yeah. Your physiology has adopted that opinion for a reason.
Yeah. And so to get to that second layer, you have to make space for that as well intentionally.
Yeah. Otherwise, you just cut that person off from ever wanting to share it again anyway, or they're just gonna parrot what they think you want them to say. So I think that's like the second part of the asking the question is being honest and real about their response, taking that extra time. Like I saw an episode of The Big Bang, which is just a goofy show. That's why I watch it. And
that's a correct statement.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. The main character Sheldon is talking to Penny, and Penny's like, "Let's open up about stuff." And Penny shares like this experience that like made her emotionally sad or whatever. And then Sheldon shares like, "I posted this video on YouTube, and someone disagreed in the comments, and it made me sad." And Penny just like, it's like, "Whatever, Sheldon. Like you're stupid or whatever." And she like leaves, and Sheldon stops her before she gets to the door and is like, "That actually hurt my feelings. Like I opened up and I was vulnerable with you." But she didn't take that second to realize like this is actually why it's like it bothers him, and that is his personality. Like this is something that would bother him, and I should take that extra time. I know it's a goofy example because it's from a TV show or whatever.
Well, but how relevant is that to today?
Yeah. Oh, how relevant it is for a relationship too. Do we only want a relationship on the most surface level with everybody around us, or do we really want to know why they think the way they think or react the way they react?
And I think small groups like this could expound and like change cultures slowly. But if you're changing a culture slowly, a small one, that could very easily be exponentially increased, just as technology is exponentially trying to push us the other way. We could fight back using this sort of power of relationship and keeping it honest.
The virility of deep human relationships.
Yeah.
It could happen.
Yeah. No, it will happen.
It could happen. You think it will?
If humanity continues, it will be because that happens.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think it's fight back. I think it's grow back.
Okay, good distinction there, good. For sure.
Because like that's what I mean. There are people who are.
I would say instead of fight, just be in opposition of that
of the
surface level. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I mean. To say fight back implicates like we have to stop this thing that's happening. It's like no, you have to adapt, conjugate with what's happening.
More jujitsu than hard karate.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see this societal trend coming.
Yeah.
You get a hold of a piece of it, and you leverage it into a more relational direction.
Yeah, let's look at it that way. Like you're a human group is a car to the freight train of technology, but you have to learn how to. We have to learn what tracks we want to lay. Because right now I would say in the macro cycle of human goings on is like we're just laying tracks because the train's coming. Like just train's rolling. We're just laying tracks. But what switches should we put in here? Where should we put?
Let's be a little bit.
What do we want to spell out with these tracks?
Right.
Because that's a human thing. That's a cognition thing. Because otherwise, the tracks are going to go, and you're never going to. By the time you build the car to catch up, the trains are gone.
Right. Either of you, what have you read, or what do you think about the place and the hierarchy of human needs? Does feeling like you're known hold?
I think it's very high. People base their identity off of being known. So if I don't feel known, then where's my place? And I think a lot of those people are more susceptible, if they're not being heard, to just look at the media and say, I'm just going to believe this because that's what they're telling me. And it makes people very autonomous if they're not known. You lose self and identity for sure.
Yeah, well, on Maslow's hierarchy, it's like physiological needs, and then safety needs, and then there's like belongingness and love needs, and then it's like esteem, and then self-actualization. So it's
What was that?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's like the classic pyramid thing. So it's once the bills are paid,
And he's
you need to
also
belong to
talking about
something.
needs in relationship to survival.
Yes,
That's why
once the bills are
the
paid,
physiological
need to belong to
nature
something.
are there. Maybe that's the goal of maybe recognizing that we are engaged in a society that doesn't know each other as well as we used to,
Right.
and people then are reacting to the lack of not being known in a way that allows for some of this stuff. Now, we could analyze it on a macro, sociological, psychological scale, or we could just choose to engage with people, whether it's through the cameras or with each other, or bringing some other folks here, a group of like 3 or 4, or whatever. We have 3. Add a couple more people. And take that second step. I think that was like one of the more important things here is a question will provoke an answer, but the answer has the capacity to reveal who the person is that thinks that
Yeah.
way.
Jordan Peterson has described kind of the thing you're talking about of like you will answer the questions. So he's like, you have to ask a question and want the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Don't ask a question if you don't actually want the answer.
Exactly.
Is that gets dire.
Wouldn't it be fun if we could do this thing and then turn technology almost on itself, using the positive connectability of it, by developing a way or technique or a genuine heartfelt technique where we ask the question, listen to the answer, and then say, what does that mean?
Right.
What does that tell me about you? Help me know you through the answer to your question. And then people just would be able to react to that, either locally or...
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I wanted to touch on. As you mentioned, utilizing those human ways that we connect and know each other, and mapping that onto the utility of technology.
Mhm.
And it popped in my brain what I heard Elon Musk talk about at one time. A lot of people go crazy over him, but I think he's smart.
I think the fact that he's smart is undeniable.
Well, what I mean is people are...
Yeah,
There's hype around him, but
Yeah.
there's real merit in just the words themselves when he said, if you look at the superhuman organism of technology, is you really are seeing our id writ large. So through the platform of podcasting and whatever, we have liberated the human psyche on a macro scale to be expressed or distributed and illustrated largely. So now it's not fractionated or confined within a media that doesn't expand.
Mm-hmm.
It stays within our heads, but now it's out there, and we can see how scared and how it's our id. So I'm saying that to say you have to want the answers to those questions, because you're asking it, and if we are here asking and recording and distributing to people to connect with, we're tapping into that id writ large. So that's what you're interacting with, and that id needs to want the answer.
Yeah. The thing I'm measuring success in my life now is, are there evidences that I'm helping people find a voice and actually use it?
Right.
And if they can do that, I'm super happy about that. So this thing could be expressed in different ways,
Definitely.
but questions are going to be central to it, listening is going to be central to it, and caring about the answer is going to be central to it.
Right.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Good job, team. Woo! 4 on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4.
4.
What does that mean?
You know how like
I'm a little old for that one.
in general, people are like, whatever on 3, party on 3.
Oh, yeah.
1, 2, 3, party.
Yeah.
Instead, 4 on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready.
That's good.